Hey everyone, this is Ali Amagasu, welcoming you to the latest episode of Cloud Unfiltered. Today's guest comes from Datadog. His name is Ilan Rabinovitch, and he is the VP of Product and Community. Welcome, Ilan.
Thanks for having me, Ali.
I appreciate it. Full disclosure, Ilan and I have known each other for a little bit, back from when I used to work at MetaCloud. He was with Uyala, and they were a customer of ours. That's how I got to know him through some of our interactions. And he was certainly friends with our previous co-host, Nikki. So he was on what was it called? I don't remember what our
OS Pod.
Oh yeah, the OpenStack podcast.
Yeah.
It's been a long time though, and a lot has gone on, and we know you're still super involved with things that are of interest to our community and of interest to me personally. So let's start with SCaLE, the Southern California Linux Expo. It happened a few weeks ago. I know you are deeply involved as one of the organizers, if not the lead organizer of this event. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on there, how the event went, what were kind of the big highlights?
Sure. So SCaLE's an open source focused conference that we've been running for about 16 years. Now, this was our 16th annual event. And so we, a couple of years back, we moved to Pasadena. So now we hold it in Pasadena each year. And we're generally open source focused, but so all kinds of different topics. But, you know, the latest topics tend to bubble towards the top and get attention. So, you know, we had a DevOps Day LA was hosted with us. We had, you know, a number. The Postgres community runs their West Coast event at SCaLE, among other things. So it's about 150 exhibitors, little over 120 talks over the course of 4 days at the Pasadena Convention Center, and it's a lot of fun. It's you know, a little bit of a pun, but it's scaled quite a bit since we started it when we were all just like freshmen in college, and we thought. We'd like it. We wanted an open source conference near us, and we were all in Southern California. So we thought, how hard could it be? I don't think we all realized we'd be spending the next 8 months of our lives for the next 16 years putting this conference together for our 4,000 closest friends and family. I did not
realize you were one of the founders of it. I just thought you were somebody who jumped in the way open source guys are jumping in on stuff all the time.
I mean, yeah, it was just a group of friends. What we wanted when we started this up, most of us were in college, and we thought. There just weren't enough technical conferences in the LA area. There definitely wasn't anything open source focused. There wasn't a lot of open source development happening in Southern California. And so we wanted to see, you know, there were people that we wanted to have that were in the Bay Area or based internationally that we wanted to see talks by. And we thought, well, if, you know, we can't get them to our meetups, but if we run a conference is an important thing. They're going to have to come to this conference. Turns out it's not as easy as that, but it worked out pretty well. And so most of the crew is still the same crew from 16 years ago. It's just gotten bigger. So I think when we started, we were maybe 5 or 6 people, and now we're, you know, there's the core group of about a dozen of us. Probably by the time you get to the day of the show, there's maybe 60 to 70 people that have their hands in making it happen. Everything from building out the network to scheduling the talks to introducing speakers. And so it's all volunteer run. So some highlights from this year, we had a keynote by John Gossman, who's was the lead architect for Microsoft's Azure platform. And it's
very cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. He talked about Microsoft's journey from sort of the era of the Halloween papers and Linux as a cancer to how they got there today. And so as we were chatting with him, it was important to me that, as we were chatting with the team about what keynote we wanted, we were trying to come up with something that everybody could agree on. It's always a very contentious topic. What should the keynote be? And we proposed this idea of, well, what if we got Microsoft not to tell us, not to come on stage and show here's a slide that says we love Linux and move on, but rather to tell us how they went from being being an open source foe to really one of the organizations that doing some of the most interesting things in open source these days with folks like Brendan Burns on Kubernetes or the Deis acquisition that they've done, or a lot of the other projects that they've worked on. And so that was a fantastic talk.
And what did he say? How did they make that pivot? I mean, sometimes it seems to me, as somebody who's worked for some of the Silicon Valley behemoths, that it's hard to turn them in a new direction once they're, they're kind of established. It gets really hard for them to do something as new as Microsoft did. It still dazzles me that they have made the switch the way they did.
So I mean, it was definitely. I don't want to put words in John's mouth, but it was very clear from his talk that it wasn't an overnight turn. A lot of what he talked about was how they are a developer. They're a company that builds tools for developers. And if they wanted to work with the short story was if they wanted to work with developers and developers were defaulting to open source, then they don't have much of an option. Similarly, if they wanted to succeed in the cloud, there's not, if developers want to be writing applications for Linux, if they want to be working with open source databases like Postgres, that Microsoft wants to be there where developers want it to be. And I don't think it was an easy transition and I don't think it's an easy transition for an organization of that size, right? You sort of indoctrinate everybody in a very specific way of thinking over decades, and it's hard to change that mindset overnight. So he talked a little about that journey and how they got from point A to point B, and some of the challenges that they encountered. And I thought it was quite insightful. The talk's online on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/SoCalLinuxExpo, and I'll give you some links for the show notes. I'd encourage folks to watch it.
I'm going to watch that one.
Yeah.
That sounds great. I mean, right now, I could talk with you about it for the next 40 minutes. I mean, did they hire in all new people, or did he give any? I'm sure he gave detail, but
yeah.
Did everybody come to church and say hallelujah? The existing team is going to turn it around, or was it no? We need to bring in new thinkers.
I think it was a mix of. I think it was a mix of both. And I mean, knowing a lot of folks that are in the open source offices at Microsoft these days. I mean, some of it is people coming in. Some of it was new people. Some of it's people that've been there forever, sort of trying to win hearts and minds and change the tune of things. Their CEO Satya Nadella, clearly at some of these types of things have to come from the top, and he's definitely been working on reminding the company about this idea that you are developer focused, not necessarily focused on particular products or particular ways, but in terms of making sure that people are successful as developers. And so, anyways, I don't think that I'd ever thought when I started my open source career, I don't think I'd ever thought I would be saying positive things about how Microsoft interacts with open source.
Right.
And that's clearly changed a lot. I would say another thing I'll say is that companies change a lot over time. Companies are, the people when the people at a company change, the culture at a company changes, and so we see that in a positive way for the most part at Microsoft now. I've also seen it in a negative way, right? How many times have you worked at a job for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and you realize, wait, the company that I joined, the company that I loved, the company that I was sold on and was sort of diehard about, whether it was a startup or an established organization, is not the company that I'm leaving. It's not the company or the company that I'm at right now. And so I think that's important to recognize. Sometimes we look at organizations, whether, and we say, oh, they're the evil empire. They're this crazy giant that's here to destroy me. And the reality is over 5, 6, 10 years, or sometimes even shorter, you've had a fairly large refresh of the people that are there, and the culture has changed. And I've seen that for both for good and for bad, both in the community and in my own career as I work places. So I guess what I'll say is that at the start of this, I was very, very new to the workforce and probably didn't realize that was the case. And after 15, 16 years working at companies at companies large and small, I realized that this is companies aren't people. It's not an individual. So the company itself is not a person who you can say, that is your opinion. It's a mix of hundreds or thousands of people that have come together to do a thing. And as those people change, the company itself changes too. So it's that's one of the reasons why culture is such an important part of what we do in our organizations, and making sure that there's an established set of cultures and norms that we reinforce as we move along. Otherwise, you lose your way.
I'm going to ask you about your organization in a minute.
Sure.
But before we leave SCaLE and discussion of that, why did you guys choose Linux back then? Was it just the new hotness at the time?
I mean, I think there was definitely so for me, it was a very practical reason when I first got involved with Linux and open source. It was, we finally got some broadband internet access in my neighborhood there in LA, and we had a couple computers, and I got tired of, I guess first world problem, but I got tired of having to take turns at the computer that was connected to the internet. And so I started doing some research online and realized I could build myself this Linux router thing with IP chains at the time, and be able to stay online longer rather than fighting my siblings for access. And that's sort of what got me started and at user groups and what have you. But from there, I really started to discover a lot of things I loved about open source and about the collaboration that is involved in building these things. And I got excited about the Linux desktop. My friends were in a similar place, and we were I think there was at the time, there's probably something like 15 Linux user groups strewn about the Southern California area. There was an install fest every 5 minutes. Like it was a very popular topic at the time, and we enjoyed it. And so I think where you find your community, where you find your group of friends, where you find out what you're connected with, that's where you end up focusing. And we all believe passionately in this topic of open source and free software. So SCaLE came out of that.
So now it's not purely about Linux though, right? I think the name's a little bit deceptive, because when I hear it, I'm like, they're just getting together and they're talking about Linux and how much new stuff could be going on with Linux. That's a side.
Yeah, so there's definitely a ton of new things going on in Linux, but I would say that I don't think SCaLE was never about Linux specifically. I mean, the name was Linux in the same way that we used to go to Linux users groups and you would talk about lots of things on top of Linux. So you might go to a Linux user group and spend a bunch of time talking about Mutt, which is a mail client that would run on Linux, but it could also run on other operating systems. It just happened to be open source. You might talk about, the Apache web server, or Nginx, or a bunch of other technologies. The goal, I don't know that the goal was ever Linux specifically. It was, talking about, it was solving interesting problems with open source software. Linux on the desktop happened to be one of them. Linux on the server happened to be one of them. And so you'd sort of work around from there. But we have talks about FreeBSD. We have talks about Kubernetes. We have talks about, around, we have a whole mentoring track, which talks about how folks can get, how folks can grow, themselves both career-wise, but also within the open source community, how we can foster new members to join us. So it's all over the place, right? The topic is open source, but I haven't really come up with a good acronym. The team hasn't really come up with a good acronym for Southern California open source, something
right.
Conference, right? SCaLE just sort of fell off, rolled off the tongue. Although even SCaLE, we started off as Southern California Linux Expo, and it took us a year or so before we started calling it, but started focusing on the SCaLE name, which I think is, I don't know, Southern California Linux Expo is a very, very much a mouthful. So.
It is, yeah. SCaLE works, but I do think, I bet there's other people out there who are like, I'm into open source, but I'm not a big Linux guy. I don't know. Maybe everybody in the industry knows.
I think we built sort of our reputation up at this time, and folks that recognize us as SCaLE probably recognize that we're not only Linux focused, but we probably could do a better job of making that known.
So you said in the beginning that part of the reason you started it was, you're feeling a little bit isolated down in the LA area from all the goings on in Silicon Valley, and how do you feel about, the growth of that? Has the community really exploded down in LA, or is it just kind of expanding at a crawl? I mean, I live down here, so I have an opinion on it, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, so I'll to be honest, I moved away from LA probably about 8 years ago, so I can't speak to. It's hard for me to speak necessarily to what the LA tech community looks like on a day-to-day basis. But as an outside observer and as somebody that is involved I come down. I'm back in LA for about a month every year around SCaLE, give or take, either a couple weeks before, a couple weeks after. I come in for SCaLE planning, things like that. But as I talk to friends, as I talk to that community, as I help with planning the event, I would say LA has changed quite a bit. It used to be that I was lucky if I could find a tech meetup a night. Now there are so many meetups in the LA area, I can't possibly go to all of them on a single night if I wanted to. I would say the Santa Monica, Playa Vista, people seem to like to call it Silicon Beach. I'm not a big fan of those types of names, but it's what it is. That area has picked up quite a bit. The Pasadena area where MetaCloud was and where the SCaLE is now, and that whole Caltech area. I mean, they call themselves the city of art and sciences for a reason, right? There's a ton of tech startups there. So I think LA's changed quite a bit. What I'd say though is if I drive down the freeway in the Bay Area, if I were to drive down the freeway in the Bay Area, everywhere I look, there's a sign for some tech related thing. Right. I don't see that in a lot of other cities. And I think that's just because, LA has a lot of different things, a lot of different industries going on. They're not all in this, it's not just tech. Whereas I think in, some other places that we think of as like the tech hubs, it's like they've got one thing. LA just has a lot of different options. I'm actually based in New York these days, where Datadog is, and it's similar. I mean, similarly, like there's a number of different industries here in New York that while there is a great tech scene here, it's not the only thing the city has going for it, and so it's not maybe not as noticeable or as visible because you walk a block and you see something else. But I would say yes, the LA area has grown quite a bit, and I can see that just with attendance of SCaLE, right? We see more people coming, more talks being submitted, more interest from attendees and from sponsors and from exhibitors. So.
Well, thanks for giving us a summary on that, and I'll be excited to get the links, especially to that keynote. But I'll post as many links as you'd like in the show notes about whatever you think the most interesting talks were. I want to ask you now about where you were. When I think Datadog, I think monitoring, but I don't know a ton about the solutions that your company puts forth. Sure. And so if you can talk a little bit about that first, that would be great.
Yeah. So I'm at Datadog. We're a monitoring and observability platform. We help our customers collect metrics, logs, and tracing data from all of their different applications, their cloud providers, their infrastructure, and we help folks to be successful through visibility into how their businesses and how their infrastructure and how their applications are performing. And so I lead our product and community teams here at Datadog. Before that, I was when I was your customer at MetaCloud, I also happened to be a customer of Datadog and was using them to monitor my own my instances running on OpenStack, running on the MetaCloud platform. So I ended up here just because when my time at Uyala wrapped up, I was chatting with the folks here and I realized how much I loved the product and how much easier it had made my life, and I thought I could enjoy working on that. And so that's how I ended up here at Datadog. And so these days our goal is just to make that all super simple and easy for you and well connected. So you might start with you might think of a situation where you're monitoring an application and you're like, oh, this API call is really slow. Well, you could figure that with our tracing solution. From there, you might think, well, is it slow because of it's slow because of some database queries, and you're trying to figure out is that database query itself bad? Is the code bad? What's going on here? And if you have infrastructure data or log data to tie back there to help figure out where it all is, you can pivot over there and say, maybe the query is not bad, maybe the disk is just bad, and I need to address some hardware issues. But being able to look at it from all those different angles is what Datadog offers you, and we're always we're looking to help you identify those problems before they become problems for your customers, helping you to visualize and establish what success looks like for your organization in the migration to the cloud or to containers, or even in your own data center. And so I think, that's in a nutshell, that's where Datadog is focused. So I get to work with all of our customers on integrating with all the different open source technologies that we monitor, all the commercial technologies that we monitor, connecting with cloud providers to pull in their metrics. So you're not just so you monitor mostly software, or do you monitor hardware as well? The whole stack, top to bottom. So from the hardware up to the operating system, up to your containers, from there maybe up to your databases and your caches and your queues, to the the web servers, and then even your own code. So with Datadog's APM product, we offer a full distributed tracing solution. We're open tracing compiled on several languages that we monitor. We work with Java, Python, Go, Ruby, and so we're able to plug in there and see where your calls are spending time, and then also show you where the infrastructure pieces fit in. And as well as now with our log platform that we released in early March, we're able to help you dig in on your logs as well and flip between the three pretty easily.
What do you think are the most important things for people to be monitoring and measuring within their clouds?
So I think people tend to focus on their research on the underlying metrics of their cloud providers probably a little too much at first. The most important thing for you to measure is what we would call your work metrics, your business metrics, the things that are good symptoms or proxies for what your customer's experience is like. Your customers, at the end of the day, they're never going to say, I want my money back because that CPU usage was just way too high on that server. What they're going to say is, hey, I made that API call and it kept returning errors, or it didn't actually perform what it was supposed to do, or it timed out. And so knowing that's the first thing you want to focus on. And then from there, you want to work backwards and figure out what does it take to make that? So we like to think about, if you think about your application, the analogy that I often use, if you think about your application as like a factory, what you care about is how many cars come off that assembly line. Not necessarily or at least that's what your customers care about. They care about how fast they're going to get that Tesla. Did they have to wait 2 years to get it, or did it show up, or did they just walk into the dealer and walk away with it? And so that's the metric that's really defining whether or not you're successful. But then, you can't make that Tesla really fast, like manufacture it very quickly unless you have rubber for the tires or, lithium for the battery or whatever it might be.
Or lithium for the batteries.
And so you need all these components. And so those are what we would call resource metrics. And you want to dig into those because you want to make sure that you're profitable and you're not spending more money or more resources than you need to. If your work metrics dip or spike and you're like, oh man, I just made a lot more cars. Maybe it's because your process changed and you're able to generate more of them now because you're more efficient, or you've reduced some waste and now you have more resources to spend on making that final solution. And so it's the same story with web servers, right? Like a web server, what do you output? Well, your product is API calls that return 200s or 500s or 400s. And the resources that go into it are things like memory, RAM, disk, network utilization, things like that. And so if you know the makeup of this thing that you're building, you're in a much better spot to monitor it and understand the right key metrics. And so I can't come to you and say I know exactly what your key metric is because it depends on your business. But we make it easy to collect them all out of the box, and usually you're up and running in just a few minutes where you have all the data that you need. And so yeah.
Do you feel like most customers come to you already knowing, look, these are the things I want to measure? Did they already know the right things to look for and they just need the tool to make it happen? Or is there kind of an educational process where a lot of times they're excited, they're really eager to measure something and you're like, that's not really what you ought to be looking at?
It's a little bit of both. I think what happens is folks put Datadog in place and they immediately have a wealth of data at their hands. And then we, with our tooling, we help them hone in on which of that data is most important to them. We like to say that collecting data is cheap. Not having it when you need it is the most expensive part. So you can't go back in time and measure something that you've never seen, measure something that you forgot to measure. But yeah, we run into both, into both situations. I would say there's a lot of organizations out there that still don't have a data-driven approach to how they measure success, whether it's in their IT world or in the business world. And that's that's something that we get to, as organizations are transforming themselves into in this online world. And folks like to use the word digital transformation, but as they're moving into this digital world, they start to realize that metrics are important. How do you know if those projects are successful? How do you know if your services are working? How do you know if your customers are happy? And that's where platforms like Datadog are helpful.
Is there a particular vertical or industry that you see doing a really good job of adopting this, or is there a sweet spot for you guys industry-wise?
It's all over the place. I mean, if we work with banks, we work with insurance companies, we work with your favorite Silicon Valley startups. It's really anywhere where you need, where you want, intuitive, easy to use tools that give you a lot of power around your metrics and around your data. That's where Datadog is. So we want to make it so that you can do very complex monitoring situations without having to necessarily be a mathematician or a statistician or a quant in and of yourself, while still offering them the ability to do that if they want to. So we tend to do very well in any organizations where you have sort of dynamic infrastructure, whether it's containers or the cloud, things like Kubernetes, where stuff's moving around on you a lot. By helping you focus more on your services rather than individual hosts or individual resources, and sort of starting from that point and working your way back to the underlying infrastructure. We find that folks are able to get a much better experience in that world. So, what
about healthcare? I guess this would fall under public sector, but are you? I wouldn't necessarily fall under public sector, actually. But are you seeing any adoption there?
We see. The thing is, you being focused on the cloud yourself. I think we've sort of all seen that everybody seems to be moving towards this idea of infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. In all industries. Some industries are a little bit slower. Some industries are a little faster. Some just dive right in. Others want to take a measured approach. But wherever it is, once you get there, you realize that your infrastructure is changing on you all of the time, and you can't just assume that you're going to monitor this thing that you named after your favorite TV character, and right. It will always be there. You get assigned your server on your first day, and it will be yours until the end of time. These things are changing on you all the time because you no longer care about the infrastructure. What you care about is the services that it provides your customers. And so, all of those organizations are the types of folks that are organizations that we try to work with. It's not a specific vertical per se, but.
Okay, that makes sense. Hey, you touched on Kubernetes for a second, and I know you talked about it being kind of, part of something that's being discussed at SCaLE, and something that it's certainly discussed, on a daily basis if you're dealing with any kind of cloud. Tell me what your thoughts are on that. And we talked a little bit earlier before the show about some studies you've seen, or I don't know if you commissioned them or if you just read them about container adoption. So share what you know.
For sure. So yeah, Datadog, we're a SaaS monitoring platform, so we have visibility into a lot of how our customers are using different technologies, and so in a very highly anonymous.
I'm not going to interrupt, but somebody's walking behind you with like a beer cart out the window. Maybe it's not beer.
It looks like orange juice and milk. Somebody is. I'm right by the office cafe, and I guess they're resupplying. So.
Okay, I was going to tell you, reach out. The beer cart's going by. I don't know what time it is in New York, but getting close to closing time. Anyway.
So yeah, we Datadog being a monitoring service, we're able to work with our customers and have a pretty good visibility into technology trends in the industry in almost real time. And so a couple of years ago, we started running an annual container adoption study where we looked at how organizations were taking how organizations were adopting containers, and is it all those those Silicon Valley tech crunch hacker news the startups that you hear about every day, or was it established organizations? And so we started to dive in. Some of this was for our own purposes of just product research. It's important to know what's being used so that we can build the right things for our customers, and some of it's some of it's because we want to see if there's interesting trends or interesting learnings for success as to how to adopt these technologies. And so we found some interesting stats there. Among other things, we found that large organizations are actually the ones that seem to adopt Docker and containers most quickly. We see similar things around orchestration. So we put out 2 studies. Most recently, the one was one called 8 Emerging Trends in Container Orchestration. I'll drop a note for you to put in the show notes if you'd like. We took a look at things like ECS and Kubernetes adoption and where folks were using it. Things that we find that have been really interesting are just the types of technologies that folks are even using in containers. The sort of the canonical or common wisdom is that folks are doing mostly stateless work in orchestrators. And as we dove in, we found that web servers like Nginx were pretty popular in there. But we also saw, below that was a ton of data source, things like Postgres and RabbitMQ and MySQL and MongoDB, where on first glance, I didn't expect those to be in the top 10 technologies folks are using, but I figured the persistence issues might be the first challenge there. But it turns out that they're even whether you're an orchestrator or not, those are still some of the most popular technologies out there for customers. So we dove in and kind of looked at a bunch of those different stats, and it's been interesting to see what folks agree with or disagree with as they look at their own environments. But there's some interesting trends there.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we talked a little bit earlier about Cisco Container Platform. I know the listeners on this show have heard that we launched it, and it's based on Kubernetes, and we're partnering with Google to launch a hybrid cloud. It's more of a long-term thing that's coming along, but it's interesting to me. What are your thoughts on the state of this whole hybrid cloud, multi-cloud adoption thing? Do you have an opinion about what's going on right now and what really is a best practice that you're seeing out there?
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to what's most important for your organization and where your expertise is, right? So if you have the team and expertise and the knowledge for how to build and manage your own data center and do it at scale, that's great. You should, if that's the most cost-effective way for you to do it, you should. So
you're saying build your own private cloud?
Yeah, sure.
It kind of functions like a public cloud.
If you have the tooling in the team to do that, I don't, and you can, and that's where you want to focus your business. There's no reason why you should not do that. You do have challenges though of, there's not unlimited resources in the public cloud either, but you have more finite resources in your own private cloud. You have to think about a lot more about things like when to acquire new hardware and capacity planning and the like. It's not 15 minutes to get a server from Amazon or from Google. It's 15 seconds maybe. It's it may be 2 to 3 months to get it from Dell or HP or Cisco or whomever has to push it off an assembly line and ship it to you. So there's those considerations. There's the accounting considerations that I mentioned, CapEx versus OpEx, and and the like. But it's I think at the end of the day, for most organizations, that ends up being a hybrid story, right? So if you go back to what, with Uyala, when we were working with MetaCloud, we found that we were born in the cloud, had lived in AWS for quite some time. Turns out some of the places where we wanted to have a data center and needed a presence, the cloud providers didn't have it yet. So we partnered with somebody to build us, to help us build us a private cloud. In other situations, maybe it's not a geographical requirement. Maybe there's some hardware or some hardware profile that you're looking for that you can't get from the cloud providers. Maybe it's maybe there's other business considerations. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that each organization should look at what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, and where their core competencies are, and work backwards from there as to what to use. I hate jumping into, whether it's with my clients on the side or with Datadog customers coming in, and the first answer is never cloud. The first answer is never on-prem. We should be focusing on what you want to do as a business, and I think there's compelling reasons for both. So
that's a great answer. I've been reading a lot about companies kind of repatriating workloads from public to private cloud. That it is a trend of sorts. But can you think of a use case, like the best use case you can think of for doing that? Like, why would you do that?
It depends on your situation. In the case of Uyala, for us at the time, we were in a spot where we couldn't get the IO, the IO performance and economics that we wanted in AWS. And so we ended up one of the things we ended up doing is building out a data center where we did have access to things like SSDs and other components that weren't available in the cloud at the time. That's changed quite a bit. I think you also look at organizations like Dropbox recently. They recently had their IPO here, but over the last year or so, the big story with them has been repatriation of their data out of S3 and out of EC2 into their own data centers. So it's really about doing your own economics and your own accounting and your own economics, and figuring out what the right choice is for you based on your needs. And I know that sounds like that's a very boring and uncontroversial answer, probably, and not what you were looking for, but that's
the truth.
I mean, it's the truth. It's the same reason why a younger version of me might have said, let's jump on Hacker News every day and figure out what the latest technologies, and that's what I'll build my software on today. Having done this for a number of years, I'm like, well, it's probably not about the tech first, it's about the solution first, and let's start there. And it's a similar story with cloud providers. You got to do what's right for your business.
Cool. Well, hey, we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you another question before we wrap it up, and that's coming back to cloud measurement. What do you feel is kind of the next thing coming with that? What's the new capability that you're excited about? Is there something on the horizon that most cloud monitoring companies can't monitor right now, but they will be able to soon, and won't it be neat? So that specifically to cloud monitoring, and then just in the larger world of tech, what do you feel like is the next exciting thing on the horizon? Not that you have yet, but that's coming.
Yeah, I think all of the cloud providers are sort of upping their game when it comes to the granularity of the data that they provide, the recency of the data that they provide, and the amount of metadata that's associated with it. And so we're just seeing them improve that quite a bit. And as they do, we like to be there and collect it right away. I think when I talk to our customers that are going multi-cloud, whether it's picking something like some of the regional clouds in China or Asia where they have to be local there, or in Europe, one of the things that they're looking for is tools and products that can connect to all of those different clouds rather than being specific to one. So I think that's being more and more organizations that are building tooling around this are going to need to build tools that are multi-cloud literate and multi-cloud capable, whether that's on-prem or one of these public cloud offerings. In the world of just tech in general, right now we're in this Kubernetes and Docker craze, where if you use the word Kubernetes or the word Docker around it, everybody gets excited, and you can fill a room or get a talk accepted, or or probably or probably pick up an investor somewhere or whatever it might be. That's the excitement. I think we're going to start. More and more people are going to maybe not be as excited about that underlying technology, which it is. That technology is important, but they're going to start to focus on higher level services that they're able to build with it and the capabilities that it gives them. And that's a similar story to what we had with Linux 16 years ago, right? We were all excited about Linux, and then we were all excited about the things that we could build on top of Linux with with some of the open source stacks, and now we're all excited about containers, which is another level up. We're just always, I think at the end of the day, you're always looking for how these things, you should be looking for how these things provide you value, not necessarily about the excitement of Kubernetes. And so we saw that to some extent in the keynotes at KubeCon this year in Austin, most recently in Austin, right, where Kelsey and others talked about Kubernetes the boring way. It was not about all the latest and greatest features that might be showing up there, but rather about the workflows that people were able to build and how they were able to make their businesses better by building on top of ideally fairly boring releases and fairly boring products, right? Exciting probably means you're up late at night fixing something broken. So
quote of the day: exciting means you're up late at night fixing something broken.
So
well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah,
I know you go to a lot of shows and talk a lot. You got anything coming up soon where folks can catch you live or pay a visit to Datadog if they're interested?
Yeah. So Datadog is at a lot of different conferences. My next talk is I've taken a little bit of a break from the talk scene, but my next talk's coming up at SCaLE in Portland in later this summer, and I'll be focusing again on Kubernetes adoption patterns. So
you use that technique to get your talk accepted. You just threw Kubernetes in there.
That is probably the third slide in my deck is a joke about how if I say Docker, I can get a talk in anywhere. It's not actually. It's not actually true. I try to, it resonates well. Usually it gets a laugh. So, but yeah, that's the plan for OSCON. And then I think just taking a little break from the talk scene for once. It was spent the last 3 years working with our community and evangelism team here at Datadog, and now I'm focusing a little bit more internally on the products that we build. So
yes, I think of you as a conference presence. If folks want to follow you online, what's your Twitter handle?
Ilan Rabinovitch, just first initial, last name, and all. Yep.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today, Ilan. Thank you so much for sharing what you know. You definitely covered new ground. We have not had anybody talking about SCaLE or really talking much about monitoring. So thanks for walking us through some of the things that we need to be cognizant of when measuring the cloud. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. So
and I hope you'll come back.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.